efforts of governance and elections in the Baltics, where we're going to try to cover the past, present, and future of voting and e-governance in the Baltics. Before we start, I would like to go briefly over the code of conduct. I would like to remind attendees to mute themselves and turn off their videos throughout the event. Remind you that we will be recording this session. We also want to let you know that you can submit the questions through Slido, and the hashtag for Slido is Baltic Bubble. So you can submit the questions on that platform, and my colleagues will post that in the chat room for Zoom in more detail how you can do that. We are very grateful for this time that our speakers and organizers have dedicated to this important dialogue. This is a respectful and harassment-free space, so we are hoping that we all keep this in our minds. COVID-19 remains a global threat, challenging not only everyday lives, but also our systems of governance. While the Baltics are introducing innovative ways of economies, from pandemic travel bubbles to open air cafes, attention is turning to the future of elections. For Lithuania in particular, the country is set to hold a national parliamentary election in October this year. If the health crisis persists, how will Baltic citizens vote safely? In Latvia, Riga has already postponed its municipal elections to later date this summer. In Poland, we had the presidential election being postponed and not happening on time. This event has been brought to you by the task force of Lithuanian non-governmental organizations that care about elections, about civic society. And so it's organized by joint task force by which is between Global Lithuanian Leaders Initiative, Think and Do Tank, and the Economic Cooperation Commission of the Lithuanian World Community. This task force was formed to educate and engage policymakers in Lithuania about the potential to introduce internet voting in the upcoming Lithuanian parliamentary elections. This event is also sponsored by nonpartisan civic initiative and voter engagement campaign. The impact of the coronavirus pandemic on the act of voting has led to a wave of cancellations and postponements across the whole world. According to research from the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance, at least 56 countries have delayed national and regional elections due to the coronavirus pandemic. France President Emmanuel Macron called for European democracy protection actions already a year ago, and this year the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, also highlighted the importance of supporting the transformation of European democracies with building our nations that would be digitally literate, fluent, and protecting elections from disinformation. So it's a very important aspect of European policy as well. So if the health crisis persists, how will Baltic citizens vote safely? Estonian e-governance model across the Baltics the way to go forward, and can digital technologies be deployed on time to avoid the postponement of elections? Currently, 3 Baltic countries have advanced systems for citizen resident authentication. They have smart ID and biometric authentication methods. Security measures are ranked quite highly, Lithuania and Estonia being 4th and 5th respectively, only after US, UK, and France. So the risk is a historically low turnout, a weaker governing mandate, and a less healthy democracy. The digital precedent is here, similar to any other imaginable activity that has recently shifted online. Robust e-governance platforms and vibrant ecosystems position the Baltics well to introduce, or in the case of Estonia, expand, improve the use of remote voting tools. Seimas in Lithuania has proposed internet voting, and it's an alternative that could be considered ahead of October elections, which might coincide with the potential second wave of COVID-19 infections. As this pandemic has highlighted a new issue that safety, all democracies should consider digital alternatives to protect the health of their citizens and their governance in the face of the current and upcoming crises. So today we bring to you three officials, one from each Baltic state, who work hard to ensure that the democracy in the Baltics is not interrupted. And we invite to moderate this event Colleen Ellio, who is the strategy lead for digitized identity approach and is joining us from Toronto, Canada. So I give the microphone to our moderator, Colleen. Take it away.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Remy Vidas, for introducing me. My name is Colleen Ellio. I'm currently leading the development of a digital identity program for the province of Ontario. And today I'll be moderating the discussion around electoral preparedness and governance post-COVID-19. So I'd like to introduce our three esteemed panelists for this discussion. First, we have Chairwoman Laura Mateo-Tite. She is the chairwoman of the Central Electoral Commission of the Republic of Lithuania. She has been a member of this commission since 2012, and for the last 3 years has been the chairwoman. She has a background and has published articles on electoral management as well as electoral systems. She's also an executive board member of the Association of European Election Officials. So welcome, Laura. Secondly, I'd like to introduce Mrs. Ilves, Ms. Jave Ilves. She's a part-time advisor for digital policy to the president of Latvia and living in Palo Alto, California currently. She writes articles on various digital policies and has an extensive background in cybersecurity, dealing with cybersecurity issues, as well as working on the national cybersecurity strategy for Latvia. She's also the former First Lady of Latvia. Welcome, Yava. And thirdly, I'd like to introduce the Deputy Head of State Electoral Office, Arne Kotme. Mr. Kotme graduated from the University of Tartu in law. He has 15 years experience as a legal advisor to the Estonian election management bodies. He is currently the deputy head of the State Electoral Office, which is the main administrative body for the Estonian elections. He's also oversees internet voting. So thank you to our three panelists for joining us today. So let's start off with you, Laura, on the topic of Lithuania's elections. So please briefly give us an overview of the electoral system in Lithuania, how it's progressed, and maybe comment on the current situation in Lithuania with respect to the upcoming elections in October.
And Colleen, while Laura is preparing to make her remarks, we would like to launch a quick poll for people who joined us today to gather their opinion about the internet voting alternative in their country. So those who are participating, if you could just take 10 minutes to quickly respond, we would like to share with the audience that is in the room today the opinions that are being held, and so our speakers are aware of that as well. I'm gonna take 5 more seconds and share the results. So here they are. We have majority of the people supporting, more than 50% supporting conditionally the internet voting. About 37% says yes, but it depends, and 6% support. So Laura, take it away.
Thank you, Ramses, and good afternoon, everybody. So COVID-19 pandemic raises many election organizing issues around the world, and Lithuania is not an exception. We analyze the practice of foreign states which organized elections this year, searching for ways and methods how to ensure the health of our society and their civil rights. Due to the second wave of coronavirus, we're planning to change our election organizing processes. 1 month ago, we submitted a proposal to Ministry of Justice to change the law of same-as election. And we propose to provide more polling stations for early and election day voting, to create more voting options for voters which are at higher risk, to give them the right to vote at home, to increase the number of days of voting at home. In countries where under inner restrictions or regulations, it's impossible to organize directly voting abroad in embassies, in such countries to organize voting only by post. On current time, we are preparing a special regulation for election organizing in which we're planning to provide special means. For example, election officials should wear protective equipment, masks, and medical gloves. Voters should wear mask gloves, disinfect their hands, and on the entrance to the polling station, commissioner should check voters' body temperature. And it is important to mention that our government decided that the CSC should give personal health protection equipment for each voter, mask, gloves, maybe disinfectant fluid. Everywhere in the polling stations should be signs and equipment for keeping at least 1 meter distance between voters. If there is a line to enter, voters should stand 1 meter apart. At the identification stage, the voter should either temporarily lower or take off his or her mask for clear identification. When leaving the polling booth, the voters should remove their gloves and place them in the used bin at the exit. On current time, we're discussing how could voters with temperature higher than 37 and a half. Maybe they should vote at home or at a special polling station. Such measures we're planning to apply in each polling district and station in the whole territory of Lithuania. But this year, the parliamentary elections will be different. For the first time in our history, voters living abroad will have a separately district where we will elect their own parliamentarian. Due to the new regulation and COVID-19 in our parliament, a group of parliamentarians registered a proposal to organize election by internet and to vote from a computer or a phone. It's no doubt that internet voting can be beneficial for a wider group of people to exercise their rights, can potentially make the voting process significantly faster for voters who are able to use it, saving the time and perhaps physical barriers it takes to travel to and from the polling station, avoiding potential queues and allowing voters to vote quickly from home. Alternative voting methods, which may create opportunity to vote in a distance, not personally in a polling station, may decrease the danger for voters' health, which may arise due to personal voting in a polling premises. But in current time, we don't have a legal framework. We don't have an innovative, secure information system based on advanced mathematics and cryptography. It would be very hard to prepare properly for e-voting. The financial cost may be too big. The implementation period may be too short. It wouldn't be enough time for qualified preparation, public procurement, creation of a system, security testing, and trainings. So, to be honest, I cannot imagine how we can successfully create an internet voting system for these elections. Of course, technologies can straighten electoral processes if carefully considered and implemented, but this process should not be rushed due to high risk of failure. And negative first experience can turn electoral stakeholders against technology, and trust then becomes difficult to regain. Any decision must not only look at the technology that will be required, but also at the pros and cons that the implementation will have on the electorate and the integrity of the election process. I think we should remember that internet voting is still a developing technology when it comes to security and trust. And it's not a secret that many countries have chosen not to use it after conducting feasibility studies for pilots due to these concerns. So yeah, that's my shortly presentation, briefly.
Great, thank you, Lara. I'd like to turn it over to Yeva to comment on Latvia's journey with respect to elections, modernization, as well as your maybe comments on your experience around your parliament currently implementing and using e-voting during this COVID lockdown.
Mm-hmm. Yes, hi everyone, and thanks for inviting. I'm really glad for the discussion. I think COVID-19 really has triggered very many questions related to sort of our digital capacities. And then, you know, since I'm living in Palo Alto and I see all this development and hype in private sector, so I'm glad that this virus kind of, again, is another push for public sector to keep up and catch up and sort of implement multiple approaches. Since I'm not working myself in an election sort of institution or organization, I will not go into so depth related to Latvian election system and upcoming elections. That's right. We have city council elections at the end of August. They have been rescheduled because initially they had to take place in spring according to the law. But due to the really high spike of the virus, that was the reason to postpone it, and obviously wisely done. It will follow multiple, like already Lithuanian colleague mentioned, it has multiple guidances coming from national CDC, how to sort of ensure the safety and what would be the best hygiene and approach to in a given health concerns. But the minor, maybe technological, speaking on this particular election, the minor upgrade is will be that we will, in Latvia, the electorate has to go and vote in their precinct, which is according to their declared address, also in Riga city. So what they will do is that they will introduce, I hope that will be worked out, it's still work on in the process, that people, because of the digital registry, that people will be able to vote in any other precinct. So that their documents will be checked against the digital database, and then if they're not gonna show up in their own precinct, that they can do it in some other. So that will be sort of a very small step of digitizing some part of that service, but slowly moving there. I'm a big supporter of government and also public authorities putting more and more services online. I have been encouraging that. I think we have a skill and knowledge and technological capacity to build things properly. And like a Lithuanian colleague mentioned, it really is important to earn the trust and to be trusted by people. And I think it's a longer process than just the elections. I would actually even say the trustworthy ecosystem, which contains many digital services, are actually one of preconditions to be able to launch also elections online. People have to get accommodated. They have to trust the financial services online, other public services, you know, other different schools, health, all you name that people interact daily. That becomes a common ecosystem where people believe that and trust that the government services are reliable, that the integrity is there, that the security is there, and that's, I think, what creates this ecosystem that helps people mind to move also into election. It also helps, I think, establish procedures and test multiple various risks in different domains. Also sort of helps improve the hygiene. And so that I would say that the whole digital ecosystem is even more important than just sort of come with a i-voting solution and negotiate that with people. I think the legal frameworks and technological solutions can be found, but we know that it's a very toxic discussion in public. I can draw sort of a very small comparison that we are introducing right now, the COVID tracing app. which all it does is traces the contacts of COVID exposure to the COVID virus. It's sort of all the security, privacy concerns addressed. Everything is safe and secure. And it creates a huge public debate about whether we can trust that app. So, I mean, I just imagine the scale and the debate if one introduces iVoting. So this is, given the current way of also information space of social media, one has to be really solid in its planning, in addressing all the whole holistic approach of the whole system, and be able politically to motivate and sort of stand and argue for that decision. So ecosystem is important. And the second what I wanted to mention, the prerequisite, which is important, is obviously infrastructure, but also the digital ID. And Latvia has digital ID, but the difference from Estonia, for example, is that we did not introduce it as mandatory, but as voluntarily. So that means that not the majority of population does not have yet the ID, because, you know, it's up to you. And we have changed that. We have introduced law. And so within next 2 years, which is the transit period, we will be moving into mandatory. And I think that's an important prerequisite to be able to move the elections into iVoting, to have that component, because people need to have that digital ID. So that may be a quick overview from my side. I hope that this debate continues, that we are looking for more options and also lessons learned, but I think it's a very complex issue. And so only just one iVoting, which is just one component in the whole election process, is only one little bit of the rest, which we need to address, I think, in a complex approach.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Yeva. So Arne, over to you. So Estonia is a pioneer in the internet voting space. Could you please briefly speak about Estonia's experience with its administering their elections, and how iVoting has been part of your journey and maybe helped in your case?
Thank you. In Estonia, we're actually the only Baltic country that doesn't have elections this year. So this is not an immediate problem with us. But indeed, one of the solutions that people can use to vote remotely is internet voting. And we have been using internet voting in Estonia since 2005. And it took about 3 years from the initial plans to implement it. But nowadays, its usage has grown immensely, and we have over 40% of participating voters using internet voting, which now makes it the most popular way to vote. And I think it has endured the test of time, not just by being convenient, but indeed it has greatly benefited from digital ecosystem, which is widely used, very lively. There are a multitude of government services built upon it, relying on government-backed digital identity, electronic population register, the X-Road data interchange layer, which enables organizations to securely exchange information over the internet. So you can do basically everything over internet, and then casting a vote over internet feels like a quite natural thing to do at this point. So I wanted to talk a little about what the impact of internet voting in Estonia has been from the voters' perspective. So it hasn't really directly increased participation that much. Well, we also have to consider that there are a lot of possibilities to vote with paper as well. But research has shown that iVoters are more likely to iVote and vote in general in the future. So it helps to keep voters engaged. And it has also been a great boon to voting abroad, overseas. Well, there has been quite an increase in voting, because it is really very convenient to vote from there. And also I should point out that disabled cast.
Oh, there we go.
Okay, I'm.
Sorry, Arne, you just cut out at the end there. If you wanted to.
I think I'm having some connection problems.
Oh, we can hear you now. If you just repeat your last sentence.
Okay, I mentioned voting overseas, and also that disabled voters can use internet voting and use assistive IT technologies. So it's there is some bit for them as well. And in regards to voter behavior, we have seen that iVoting is in general gender neutral and age neutral. And all in all, it takes about 3 minutes to vote. And we have seen that older voters actually tend to vote a bit faster. Also, we have noticed that if it takes more than 30 minutes to go to the polling place and back, then this is sort of a tipping point. And people are then more likely to vote over internet. Also, I would like to point out one important result in this research is that iVoting really does not influence voting results. The voters are not going to vote for a specific party or a candidate because of a new voting method. They still do base their decisions on issues important to them. So there is really no political impact in voting results. And of course, internet voting does come with a fair share of its challenges. So maintaining trust has already been pointed out. In Estonia, the trust is very high, but there is always a dedicated opposition to it. And so it is a little polarizing to the society. And in regards of security, you also have to accept that the internet can never be 100% secure. Systems secure, auditable, and observable. And it's also something that elections management bodies cannot really do on their own, but they need to cooperate with government organizations. I think I'm running out of time now, so I'm glad to answer any. I can talk for hours about this.
No, thank you. That's a really good. That's really good information you shared there. So, with the COVID-19 pandemic, I want to bring it back to Laura with Lithuania. Do you think the pandemic has provided enough of a business case or a push for Lithuania to move towards digital tools such as iVoting? And do you think it would help in terms of engagement with expats living in other countries who want to participate effectively and have had challenges in the past participating in elections?
Yes, of course. When we're talking about COVID-19 and when we are thinking about our voters abroad, would be nice to have such option like internet voting. But today we don't have the real opportunity. We don't have time to create the system. But in the nearest future, I think. But when we're talking in the long distance, why not actually? But we should think what we want, why, how to create, and which problem can this opportunity solve? Which problems we have? So.
And what are some of the concerns that are raised with respect to internet voting and electoral administration modernization? So often we hear that, implementing iVoting can bring risks around information and privacy. What are some of the concerns or barriers that you're hearing about in Lithuania that has maybe prevented internet voting from being considered or implemented to this point?
Actually, yeah, I don't know. We can solve some problems, but of course we can create some problems. And right now in Lithuania we have such thing as vote bribery, and I'm not sure if internet voting can solve the problem. And firstly, we should create the trust, and without trust, without safe system, we cannot talk about iVoting here in Lithuania, because it's number one. And when we're talking about elections in this autumn, so maybe the safest way is just to organize elections in the same rules. We should not break the current rules and organize elections as much as if possible under normal conditions.
So Yeva, I'd like you to jump in here to talk about, from a cybersecurity perspective, what are some of the arguments that you've heard against internet voting, and how can some of those risks or challenges be managed?
Mhm.
Yes,
Yeah,
of
thanks.
course.
I can pick up a little bit of also where Lithuanian colleague started to talk, and I think the arguments are very wide, and unfortunately, I think the whole global trend of discussing that there's no privacy and there is a permanent surveillance of citizens online, it kind of feeds into, and sometimes it's very different to separate, where you go in depth in a practical argument, technical, and where it's like a general overall sort of political game or play, or a very on a surface argumentation going back and forth. But when I think when it gets at least partly to the more substance and really a discussion on practical, I think the difficulty is to argue back. Obviously, it's difficult to explain complicated technologies to people. But the component that is mostly argued is that you have to vote in privacy, like your vote is secret. So the way you vote, what you voted for, has to be secret. And then there is this general perception there is no such thing as a secrecy. If you do something online, if you casted the vote, there must be a way how someone can sort of penetrate and figure it out which way you voted. And I know that I have studied, to my best knowledge, I'm not IT person either, but I have studied Estonian sort of models in different ways, and I believe that has been taken care very well. Yet for a general audience, that's a very easy argument. Like, it can't be true. If I voted online, there are no secrets online. So that's one thing. And then the second, I think where I think is also, because on online, at least how Estonians, and I'm sure Estonian colleague can sort of correct me better or explain, but you have this, like by mail, it's like this 2-envelope principle. First you submit that, it verifies that you are you and you are, entitled to vote and all of that. And then it kind of peels that envelope off, and then it puts your vote, which in certain procedures, gets open and counted in. So it's kind of like separated. And the problem is when people say, hey, but if somebody interferes and we never notice that somebody did because they do it all in secret, so how do you verify that my vote has counted rightly? Because in a paper ballot, people believe, you go to the box, you open it up, you count it again, and we all are happy because now we know what the truth was. So we know that actually these things can be worked around in paper ballot too. However, of course, on digital, that argument is harder to explain. You don't have a tangible things where you can show. So those from the implementation part, as far as have been participating in Latvia in sort of debates on that, these been the hardest ones to sort of argue back that your vote will be secret. And there are multiple, steps in the Estonian process, starting from that you can vote today, but you can also vote tomorrow. So if somebody stood by you and threatened you today to vote that way, I mean, you can change that vote in those days, or you can at the end go to the paper ballot and actually vote completely differently, and then the digital votes will be raised. So there are multiple built-in technological and procedural sort of ways, but those are two topics that are hard to get around in debate.
Great, thank you for that, Eva. So we're going to take a question from the Slido, and I think I'll probably direct this to you, Arne. So iVoting in Estonia has existed since 2005, and maybe Laura and Eva, you could comment as well. This person is suggesting, you know, maybe Lithuania and Latvia could copy and paste this system that's been in place in Estonia. What are your thoughts and comments on that? So let's start with you, Arne.
Well, sure. Technically, it's possible. I mean, the system is built in a way that you could just implement it in another country with another set of rules. But it's not a question of copy and pasting the system. It's getting the agreement and the general. And in general, the public has to trust it. And I think Eva gave a very good overview about some of the debates that we are having in Estonia as well. So, how do you know that your vote is that your vote remains secret or it isn't tampered with, and that results are tabulated correctly? And how do we voters who are coerced into voting in a certain way? So all these things need to be answered first in order to have any kind of trust in the system.
Laura, thoughts?
Yes, firstly, I want to say that we are talking about internet voting here in Lithuania more than 10 years, but we still don't have internet voting. And to answer into the question, maybe we can just copy. Of course, we can, and maybe it would be the easiest way to have internet voting here. But I'm not sure what for that. But because what works in other country, in Estonia, for example, it could be here, and it can work here in Lithuania. Maybe the system from Estonia could bring us here a bad scenario and can destroy our democracy. I don't know, I guess.
And Yeva?
Yeah, I think I completely agree. You can't. I mean, you can copy or you can learn experience, or you can learn some principles and you can learn some ideas. But it has to be national, and it has to be. It's a lot of. It's a culture. It's, you know, the things that work, the procedures that work, the structures that work. Those are all. There are all these components that you need to build that trust, because it's not only the technical gadgets that needs to be trusted, but the whole process, procedure. So I think it's important to tailor it that it fits the best to national needs. And so we've been discussing a lot and we've been learning a lot. And I also think the other element that is also important, and I think it's true for Estonia, is that for every election round, it's not like you take the same old solution and you apply, you know, in next election. I think technology people work on every election to tweak, to update, to work in new recommendations, to concerns. So it's a bit like almost like a race, because you have to keep up. In a technology world, there is no moment when you can sit down back in sofa and say, hey, this is all great, I've done so good, now I can sort of rest the rest of my life. So it is also a constant, like a Estonian colleague said, it's a constant pressure on them also to address concerns, to address the questions, to sort of make twists in the system. So there's a lot of that requires a national work. And then I think it is also a very important point that the Estonian colleague mentioned, that the structure which is responsible for elections cannot do that itself. So it's a lot of depends on what is there in the state. what are other resources who are able to sort of build that system and also be trustworthy to sort of convey that forward. So I think, like it was mentioned, it's hard to copy paste, but I think you can pick up ideas and lessons learned and then adapt them.
Thank you for that. So another question here from the Slido. So this person is asking about the role of a scrutineer in an I-voting type system. So how can a person be a scrutineer with e-votes? What kind of training would be required, if any? Maybe Arne, you could take that.
Yeah. Sure. One of the problems with internet voting is that you cannot just walk into the room and understand what is going on. So, in fact, in Estonia, there is a separate observation program. So it takes a couple of days so people can see how the procedure runs from the beginning to the end. So we walk them through all the process. And additionally, the results can also be audited and verified by a separate application. So it is possible to write it yourself and compile it. And of course, this is something that an ordinary person probably cannot do, but the possibility is still there.
Great, thank you. Another question from the Slido for the electoral commissions. How concerned are you about disinformation threats during campaigning, and how do you plan to counter those threats? I know some work has been done in this area in the Baltic countries, so can you maybe speak on that? And I'll go to Laura first.
Yeah, it's actually a great question, and we're thinking about disinformation, and we're cooperating with some NGOs, and of course we're checking the information, and I don't know what to tell else, but you know, the coronavirus, it looks like we will have some disinformation on election time, so we should be prepared for that.
Thank you. Yeva?
That's one of the segments when I say about the whole ecosystem, and I even could push a bit that line saying that, you know, we worried about hacking systems. I think today one of the big problems, can't say whether the biggest, but it's like hacking people's minds and hearts, and we can see that, you know, this manipulation and the capacity of information space to mislead people or manipulate them or influence them in unseen manner that people would not even notice is a big question. And I think we will have to, I think on a European level, on a global level, actually hold democracies that's a hot debate for every democratic country. How you are able to sort of differentiate this micro-targeting that has been so successful initially to sell the product. It's clearly very well applicable also in a political process. So, you know, you don't have to only sell shoes. You can very well sort of change people's minds on political subjects or also on the parties when it comes to elections, and it becomes all very mixed up. And so that's a big question that we have to deal with. And unfortunately, that's also not only questions that government has the sole sort of power to resolve. We actually do need the big tech companies that provide these services to be cooperating, because we almost partly don't have a skill and knowledge to address. I mean, it's kind of like people would look at government and say, hey, we need a solution. And we would turn to the big companies and say, hey, guys, we actually don't even know what's in that black box, because that is a black box that we only see the results. So all the academia is struggling to figure post factum to find out what happened with Cambridge Analytica or with some others, you know, more or less known cases. So I think that information space and in context of elections is a very critical component, and that probably will lead to some new rules or regulations, including campaigning and the way you advocate. I think that's I just don't see how we can get around it, ignoring it, but sustaining a democratic process where we want to have people having educated decision based on sort of proper information.
Yeva, do you want to comment as well on this question that has come up? Someone is asking, have electoral commissions thought about contacting Facebook as a leading social media source to agree on a partnership to counteract voter manipulation? Like, can you comment on, you know, your thoughts on the
Yeah,
effective?
we haven't even only thought about it. The last ones where it was a common effort was the European Parliament, because last spring there was the European Parliament elections and there were multiple cooperation channels established, even procedures established, but it didn't all go very smooth. And I think it only touched also a very specific surface, which is like campaigning of political parties. But we now see that there's a lot of social activism around topics, which not necessarily means, you know, campaigning for a person X, but there is the, you know, polarizing and abusing different topics, including, you know, in COVID, it can be about vaccines, it can be about all kind of issues. So that's there. I think all national governments in preparations of their elections, at least in Latvia, I'm sure in colleagues have the same. We have special task force who actually did discuss with Facebook and with other sort of media platforms the cooperation. But I think there's a lot of unknowns, and we need actually to work more together to come to solutions, not only to try to mirror the analog procedures that we used to have sort of developed for tens of years, just make sure that those procedures are mirrored in internet. I think it requires much different, it requires different studies. So that sort of should be maybe I see from European, if that would be a joint initiative where we could really put more academia in and better research of actually what to do with that information space.
So I'm gonna thank you, Yeva. I'm gonna turn back to Arne. We're getting a number of questions on the Slido regarding security and you know, how hackable internet voting is. So can you comment on any key cyber threats that Estonia has been focused on and you know, or has experienced that you can talk about? So how secure is iVoting?
What we aim to do is to have like a chain where we can, every element we can prove that it has not been tampered with. This is the main goal of our internet voting system. So we need to be able to verify everything, that all the ballots that were cast were registered, that they were collected, that they went to the count, and that the count was correct. So a lot of effort has gone into that, and of course cybersecurity is always an issue, and here we also get assistance from other governmental institutions like the State Information System Agency, and so far the system has indeed held quite well.
Great, thank you. Another question from the Slido. This question is for Laura. When do you think internet voting will be possible for Lithuania? Are we talking about 2021 or 2022? How far out do you think it is?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Actually, excellent question. And yeah, but right now, as I mentioned, we don't have the legal framework, and we don't have the same system. And in my personal opinion, I think internet voting in the nearest future sounds a little bit like as a very risky solution. But in the long period, of course, after discussions with stakeholders cyber experts, it could be a very innovative and useful decision. To say when we will have internet voting system, right now I don't have the answer. I cannot answer because, as I mentioned, we need legal framework, and of course after that we need money, of course, finance, and we need to create the system to make an information campaign, and so on.
Thank you for that. So we have about 7 minutes left. So I want to give each of the speakers an opportunity to comment on the following question, maybe about a minute each. So how do you think digital tools, we talked a lot about iVoting today, but I won't leave it just that, but how do you think digital tools will figure within ensuring democratic governance in the Baltic region? And where are some areas or areas of priority that the Baltics should focus on to enable and support democracy to continue to be strong in your region? So let's start with Arne.
Well, like it has been pointed out, implementing instant voting is largely related to not just technical questions. But once you have it in place, you actually would have some other possibilities. This is something that we have discussed about, like running internet voting as a service. You could use it for quite a lot of things. But again, it's not just enough to provide this solution, but you need to know what to do with it and have a certain agreement about that.
Thank you. Yava, so same question for you. How do you think digital tools are going to impact the future of democracy in the Baltic region?
I think it is a challenge. It's not only in Baltic region, in every country. And I think I would say maybe two from top of my head. One is that we do have to push up the digital public services. I think we just have to go along with people, because in private sector, in our private lives, we are all very digital. And I think government has to be able to provide the digital services themselves. And I think it's expected from people. It's mandatory. We have to be more efficient. We have to save finances on certain things, or moving to digital domain. So that's part of being a sort of successful democratic country, is being also efficient and keeping sort of up with development. On democracy itself, I really believe, and it's something that is very much shared in Latvian government and also in President's office, is this information space, which has a really multiple different challenges. It's like how to also keep up the professional media environment, how to sustain, how do we work with digital tools and with the big digital companies that have a different laws and maybe different perceptions and different ideas. So this is a one big challenge that I think we all have to actually face to make sure that democracy sustains. We will have to address the information space, and maybe it will require more regulations and laws. Maybe it will require more thinking and sort of in-depth analysis, but that's something that in a current condition, I don't believe it can sort of continue like that without any effort taken to deal with multiple consequences that we see on misinformation, and also without elections or in context of elections as well.
Great, thank you. And Laura, lastly, how do you think digital tools will impact democracy in the Baltic region?
Yeah, actually, good question. And maybe, who knows, but firstly, thinking about elections in Lithuania in this autumn. And after that, of course, we can talk about others about new innovative technological solutions. And who knows, maybe we will be the second state in the Baltic region which will have internet voting system.
Well, I'd like to thank all three of the speakers for joining us today to talk about, governance and electoral administration in this COVID era. And I would like to pass it back to Rimvydas to close out the event.
Thank you so much, Colleen, and thank you, the speakers, for a very informative and enlightening conversation between the Baltic countries, where we stand, where we came from. We all got independent together, and we are building very firm foundations for our democracies. And we have advanced our digital capabilities quite well, and it shows in the global rankings when it comes to security issues. It shows in our ability to identify, authenticate people, our citizens and residents, and to use digital platforms to provide government and governance services. This is very, very, very inspiring. So after this conversation, I think we only are inspired to continue understanding better the systems, understanding better the obstacles that are in our way. And for us, for Lithuania, who is next in line with the national elections, I think it is very important that what Laura has highlighted, that the political agreement is the key. And so the parliament and the law that is introduced currently and debated is very important. If we cannot have internet election this October, let's do it in few years, in a year, but let's pass that legislation, because as Laura said, that's the first step that we need to do in order to move forward. We've been debating for 10 years. It's time to move on and have that tool just in case we need it, because the risk to democracy comes not only in the situations through cybersecurity, it comes through physical threats, and COVID-19 crisis really highlighted. And this is probably not going to be the last one crisis that we will need to deal with, where mobility and access will be the key. And it's great to know that European Union focuses on this and cares about this, and that we will continue to focus on this. So to close this, we would like to launch the same poll and see if the conversations that we had today changed your opinion. If the participants could cast their votes again, we would be happy to share that with the group and see whether that improved their support for internet voting, or maybe it decreased. I'm going to give you a few more minutes. In the meantime, I would like to thank the organizing committee that put this together. It takes a village to have an event like this, and in this day and age, it's a digital effort for us. So we have people joining in organization of this event from New York, Skydra from Toronto, Dominikas from London, Sigita from Amsterdam, Aurelia from Italy, and of course, Aushra from Vilnius in Lithuania. I really thank my colleagues for dedicating their time to this important conversation. And I'm gonna show you now the results from the polling, and we see that we have slight decrease in absolute yes, and a little bit yes, but it depends. So it didn't change much of the opinions of the participants today. To close, I would like to say that this initiative continues, and in the next month or so, we would like to organize another one that maybe will focus on more narrow questions, cybersecurity. So stay tuned, and I would like to ask the organizers to put the last slide to stay connected with us. You can follow GLL Think and Do Tank and look for the most updated information, or follow us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, Mūsų Metas Dabar campaign, which is the civic campaign for voter engagement in Lithuania. So thank you so much again for joining us today, and we will look forward to having you in our events in the future.